All right, folks. Welcome to Greasy Time, episode 8. Hey everybody, I'm jdsimomusic. Welcome to Greasy Time, episode 8. Can you freaking believe it? I can't believe that I've done this 8 times. Here, let's put the weekly graphic up there. Brother Curtis, it was his birthday. I think it was yesterday, day before. Y'all know how much I love Curtis Mayfield. Huge hero. So anyway, folks, welcome to the show. Grateful to be here once again, coming at you from the funky basement in the house of grease. I hope everybody's doing okay out there. Gonna throw my usual stuff up there, throw the fancy logo, so I remember who I am. And as usual, if you'd like to make a donation to the JD Simo House for JD Simo, I humbly thank you. So anyway, coming at you right out the gate there, little saying sort of in the style of Earl Hooker, sort of like 2 bugs and a roach kind of a thing. Also, Freddie King had a sort of a thing similar that he called Funky Mama, that he did, where it was like. That kind of thing. And of course, Buddy Guy did Mary Had a Lamb like that, which then Stevie Ray and a bunch of other people have done like. But anyway, I like Earl Hooker, so starting off the show kind of in that vein. So got a lot to talk about tonight, and we have I got a brand new song and video to debut at the end of the show, as has become the norm here. So we'll just jump right in. We'll start with our records of the week, if you will. Usually there's 5, but there's 6 this week. I actually upgraded my stereo system for the first time really in my life, where I've got I upgraded my turntable, my receiver, and I've just, because I'm home, I'm able to kind of dedicate much more time to the hobby. And one of the other things that's been really great, as a result of the last several months is, um, for the sake of financial reasons, I've basically gone through every type of thing that I had, um, that I wasn't using, like whether it was studio gear or musical gear or um, records I never listened to, and just all types of stuff, just decluttering my life, getting rid of stuff that wasn't necessary. Um, it started as kind of like part of phase one of button down the hatch, of not knowing how long um, I was going to be impacted financially by the pandemic. But it's turned into a really beautiful, like my life has become so uncluttered as a result of it. And through wheeling and dealing and so on and so forth, I've been able to upgrade my system, and it's been really fun this last week. And when I say upgrade, I mean it's still incredibly modest. I am no audiophile by any means, um, but it's just, I've got some respectable stuff for the first time in my life, and that feels really cool. And I've really been enjoying listening to records with my little 18-month-old daughter, and teaching her about music, and teaching her about how to handle records and all that. It's just been really fun. So here's my records of the week. We're gonna start with a band that's been around for a while, but I'm just obsessed with, to a certain extent. Orgone, they're from California, kind of following in suit with my Afrobeat, funk obsession. These guys are so good. This is their record, The Killian Floor, which I believe came out in 2010 or 11, somewhere in there. There's multiple records of theirs that I really love, but this one in particular I've been spinning a lot this week. There's some really great tracks on it, and they also do an awesome cover of "Do Your Thing," which is an Isaac Hayes song that I love a lot. And actually, if you get the chance to listen to I believe it's called "It Came from Memphis" or something like that. It's the Isaac Hayes box set that came out about 3 years ago. There's an extended, like 33-minute version of "Do Your Thing," with Isaac and the Bar-Kays backing him up, or most of the Bar-Kays, I should say. Michael Toll's one of my big heroes, is playing guitar. It's just crazy, man. It's so good. So anyway, they do a cover of that on this record. So yeah, this is somebody. If you're not familiar, check them out. If you're familiar, you know exactly what's going on. There's another thing this past week. There's actually 2 records out of this. This next record is called Home Cooking, and this is by a band called the Soul Investigators. I've become really kind of really into the Timian label, which is in Helsinki, Finland, of all places. And they the Timian label, to people who are kind of obsessed with funk, funk 45s and vinyl and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's been, I think, about at least 20 years, about as long as Daptone. They've been making hellaciously, incredibly soulful, awesome records, and it's just crazy. This little label, it's really raw. It makes some of the Daptone stuff sound refined. Anyway, this is really, really cool. The Home Cooking record. I've been digging on this a lot, this record, and actually this next record is also a Timian record. This is Ernie Hawk's The Scorpio Man, and he plays the flute, and it reminds me of sort of like Herbie Mann, if you're familiar with Herbie Mann from the 60s. It's just like, incredibly funky tracks with this funky flute over the top and fuzz guitars and tape delays and all kinds of weird, wacky, psychedelic stuff. And this is just another really cool Timian release. And all these are available on Spotify as usual. So anyway, yeah, check out the Soul Investigators and check out Ernie Hawkins. These are just records I've listened to a ton this week. The next record is, no secret to people who know me. This is, Curtis Mayfield's first solo record after he left the Impressions, and this has, Move On Up, and it also has, If There's a Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go, and We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, and I know I've talked about in the past how much I like Roots, but I put this record on for the first time in a while several days ago. It's just so brilliant. It's just really cool, to see how he changed, how he evolved. He was in a very successful group, the Impressions, and when he stepped out to make this album, it was a big. It's like anybody who's had success and is deciding to do something different than what has already been successful. I mean, it's just really respectable, especially when it's done so well, And so what can you say? I mean, this is one of many records that has formed the musician that I've become. This next record is a record that I actually shared with Adam yesterday. We've both been on a huge, since Tony Allen, who's the famous collaborator of Fela Kuti. Tony passed away. He's the great drummer, a legendary drummer. He passed away recently, and Adam and I both have been really obsessed with his catalog and doing a real deep dive of that style of music, Afrobeat. And Tony is one of the archetypes of the style, and this record in particular, I just kind of found by chance on Spotify. I hadn't listened to this particular record. It's called The Source, and it's a really good example of there's parts of it that sound like you're listening to, a free jazz record of the era. There's moments where it's sort of Ornette Coleman-like or Wayne Shorter-like, or, and then there's these destructive JB's type grooves that happen. It's just ridiculous. As only Tony Allen could do. And so, anyway, this has been on heavy rotation in my house this week as well. And so that's 5, but there's a 6th one this week, and this is something that that this next one is one that I didn't know existed until just a few days ago. But this is the great Earl Van Dyke, who was the piano player in the Funk Brothers for Motown. He wasn't one of the original members from the way beginning. I think he started cutting at becoming a member of the house band at Motown after they'd already become established after a few years. But he was Earl himself, if you've ever watched the movie Standing in the Shadows of Motown, or you've watched any documentaries about Motown, Earl was he was a natural leader. He was a big part of the Motown sound. He was, obviously he's playing, but also he was kind of like the band leader. He kept everybody in line. He made sure everybody was on time. He was the one that everybody kind of looked up to. And this record, which is called The Motown Sound, is on Spotify, and I just found it by accident. And it's fantastic because about half of it is, or I should say about a third of it is the tracks from Motown songs that you would recognize, but without the vocals, so you can really hear what the band is really doing, and especially like the guitars and the keyboards, which are kind of tucked under the vocals, is pretty amazing. I mean, obviously these are things that I know all too well, but it's just when you hear how brilliant these guys were and how amazing their parts were, it just continues to inspire. And then there's like another third of it that's like live stuff of the Funk Brothers playing, and they're covering like stuff of the day. They're covering the Meters. It's pretty funny to kind of like hear them play other people's material from that time period. And then the last third of it is like some awesome instrumentals that that the Funk Brothers cut. And man, you know, I mean, it's for anybody who loves James Jamerson, it's pretty incredible to hear all of that. But Eddie Willis and Robert White, I'm having a brain fart at the moment. Joe, the Italian guy, I'm forgetting the third guitarist, but they're absolutely, you know, it's just great to listen to them. So anyway, that's enough gushing, right? So those are the records of the week, and I have some of those on vinyl, and enjoyed them on vinyl. But obviously, they, as I say always, all these are available on Spotify, easy to find. So check them out. They brought me a lot of inspiration this past week. So I'm gonna do a song for you right now. So I'm gonna do a Lightning Hopkins tune. It's the first Lightning Hopkins song that I ever heard him do when I was a little boy, and it goes like this. It's kind of his signature song, you know. I'm going to Louisiana, get me a mojo hand. I'm going to Louisiana, well, don't give me a mojo hand. I won't fix my woman's soul, can't have no other man. The ground was my bed last night, rocks was my pillow too. The ground was my bed last night, rocks were my pillow too. Well, I woke up this morning, and maybe what in the world I'm gonna do. I lay down thinking, buy me a mojo hand. I lay down thinking, well, buy me a mojo hand. Well, don't let your woman boy live like she fixed me. Yeah. Fix you like mine fix me. Yeah. Don't let your woman fix you like mine fix me. Yeah, don't make a fool of her, about as a fool can be. How can a woman act funny when she got another man? Well, now when a woman act funny, whoa, when she got another man. You know she won't look straight at you. She always raising sand. Do some Lightning Hopkins for everybody on a Friday night. I love Lightning Hopkins. He's one of my happy places. Oh man, so I'm going to right now transition into talking about equipment and answering some questions. Do the rig of the week. I'm going to do another song, and then I've got a story to share with you guys. It's the greatest story I have to share of all of my time playing music or being in the music business. I've been asked that before, and it's no question, no contest. It's a fairly lengthy story, and it's a really good one. And it's not one that I've shared publicly, and I'll explain that in a minute when I get to it. But anyway, and so then I'll do that, and then at the end of the show we'll premiere the new track, okay? So, all right, everybody hanging in there? I'm having a good time. So, rig of the week this week. I've gotten tons of questions about this guitar. I've talked about it on the show before. I want to throw a huge amount of thanks out to my dear friend, Kevin O'Connor. Here's his picture. Kevin, if you're watching, gotcha. No, this is his picture currently. Kevin O'Connor down at Carter Vintage. He's really been an incredible help to me in sort of dialing this guitar in. I've experimented with it a bunch, and he's just been really helpful and really awesome. And if you need stuff worked on, you know, he's a great one. And I love you, pal. I hope you're having a good weekend and a good week. And I love him. He's a good man. And also my good friend Zach down there, who's a great amp builder. He's down at Carter Vintage too. And then of course, you know, good friends with great Joe Glazier and my buddy Jake down there at Glazier, who's helped me out with this as well. But anyway, this is an old Silvertone 1446. It was at Carter Vintage. They had a guitar that I wanted to check out. So this is like a month ago, I guess now. And so they had a guitar I wanted to check out. And so I asked if I could check it out. And they're doing curbside service while the store is temporarily closed to the public. And so I got there. I had Josephine, my little daughter, in the back seat and in her car seat, and they didn't have the particular guitar for whatever reason. It either sold, or I think it was a consignment that maybe was taken back or something. And so I was talking to the cat there, and I said, well, what do you got? You know, you got anything sort of similar? And he rattled off a bunch of stuff that they had, and he mentioned this, and I said, well, yeah, sure, I'll try that out, see if I like it. Not really thinking much about it. And now this is the case with most of the pieces of equipment that I end up really connecting with. It was happenstance. It wasn't something that I personally sought out, you know what I mean? It just happened. That's how it happened with Red. That's how it's happened with the Ampegs. That's how it happened with the Fuzz Face. It's just It just happens, you know. And so yeah, I got it home and I just fell in love with this thing. I guess it's from the mid '60s. I don't really know the year of it specifically. And yeah, I mean, I've used it solid. I mean, every track that I've debuted on the show here for at least the last 4 episodes or so, maybe 5, has been this guitar, and just really comfortable with it. I just really love it. It's inspiring to me. And it's really inexpensive guitar, you know. But I've experimented a bunch. I put some old, well, when I say I mean Kevin, put some gold foils in here, and they just did not work. And that was a bit of a fiasco. So put the original pickups in there. Did put a new harness in here, which improved noise and stuff like that, because the old pots that Silvertone used in these days were these huge pancake ones that are real prone to a lot of different problems. Normally I would leave stuff like that alone, but in this case it actually makes a big difference for good, you know. And also put some new tuners on it, or had Kevin put new tuners on it, and finally got it all kind of completely dialed in just a few days ago. And I love this thing, and I think it's important to be open, because you just never know what might come across your lap that really inspires you. And like I said, like every great piece of equipment that I've really bonded with and inspired me was not something that I sort of like actively sought out. It just kind of happened, and I was open to it. It was maybe not anything like something I would normally be into, and so yeah, so I love this thing, and it's incredibly inspiring. I've never had an instrument other than Red that inspired me that much. I'm always kind of looking and open to it, but it's like this thing is just hung tight. So anyway, so yeah, so that's that. So thank you again to Kevin O'Connor and the people at Carter's. I went and did a couple of videos for them a week or two ago, which was great to see everybody. And yeah, you know, they're a big part of my life. They've been very helpful to me. So some other stuff I want to talk about as part of kind of the rig of the week is I get a lot of questions about the recordings that I'm doing down here. And I've spent a lot of time dialing in how to get, you know, kind of some what I would consider to be old school kind of sounds, using Pro Tools, and you know, obviously when it comes down to it, it's all about the instruments and the musicians, but I've really kind of come onto a very basic, unconventional, well, I don't know. I mean, if you're into like stuff like Daptone and it's using that as sort of the template. And Gabe Roth in particular has been a huge inspiration to me from an engineering standpoint, because I just think he gets incredible sounds, and he does it by experimenting, using his ears, and using very non-traditional types of methods of miking techniques and stuff like that. And so I wanted to share with you guys some little things, basically like my 3 favorite plugins that I use all the time, okay, as part of my rig of the week, and hopefully this can help some people out there. The main thing that I use all the time is Softtube makes a Tube Tech pack, both the compressors and the EQs, and I use all of them, and that's pretty much all I use now. I use them on the drums, I use them on guitar, I use them on bass. I even used the compressor a little bit on the mix bus. These are just great units, and you know, obviously Tube Tech, the hardware units are amazing, made in Denmark. You know, in the school of the old Pultecs, where, you know, and here's a picture of the main EQ that I use all the time. The thing that's really cool about these is you can boost frequencies and cut the same frequency, so you're pushing and pulling. And especially like on drums, when you're trying to like zero in on like making the kick drum huge, but having it like kind of pull away where the snare drum can be really crispy and funky sounding. it's just incredibly, incredibly useful. Um, and I've experimented quite a bit. I do, as people have asked in the past, I bus the drums, which usually is a sub kick. These days, an old Shure 55 from the 50s, sort of a foot. Well, here I can show you again. I showed it last week, but I'll show you again. Here's the perspective of the drums, Adam's old Ludwig kick. But there's a Shure 55 sort of pointing at the snare, and this is totally a Gabe Roth thing, in between the kick drum and the hi-hat. And then there's a 57 up over his shoulder that I EQ to be kind of brighter for the cymbals mostly, and to give the snare a little bit of attack. And also the kick drum from that position is really cool over his shoulder. And then down front here, there's a sub kick. Okay, so it's usually 3 channels, and I bus them all together. I EQ them separately before I bus them, and then I compress them all together. Usually using the Tube Tech compressor. And so anyway, so that's a big thing. And then one other trick that's sort of something that I've happened upon is to sort of tame high end, and also to kind of gritty it up a bit, because that's the thing with digital, is you're dealing with, things that are really pristine and perfect, and trying to kind of screw them up or trying to dirty them up and make them sound not perfect can be difficult. So there's this plugin I learned about from a great engineer here in town named Don Bates many years ago that we made Rise and Shine with. Adam and I did. And it's called the Decapitator. This is a Sound Toys plug, which is incredibly popular at the moment. Every great engineer uses it. This thing's great on everything too. This is great on drums. This is great. Basically, it's like an amplifier that you can use as an EQ, as an overdrive. There's a lot of things you can use, but it's just really a great sounding, piece of kit. And I've actually now gotten to a point where I bus before all of the tracks go to the master fader. I bus everything, guitars, bass, drums, everything, reverbs, everything, to a pre-master fader bus that I put the Decapitator on, and I basically use the Decapitator to smooth it, to take away any brittleness, and I also use it to kind of warm it up with maybe a little bit of distortion. That's real warm and real kind of low mid, to kind of emulate, as if I was hitting a tape machine, So I've spent a lot of time tweaking, and it's a week to week, kind of work. I've worked really hard, and it's been really fun and rewarding. But I wanted to share those couple of things because I think those are things that could really potentially help people out there. And those are things that have really kind of, they're just kind of the bedrock of what I'm using that's working for what I'm trying to do on these funky instrumental things that I'm putting together for the Greasy Time show. So yeah, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to touch on gear-wise before I move on, but I think I'm good. So anyway, so is that groovy? Is that groovy? Have I lost you? I hope I haven't. So I'm gonna do a song right here, and then I'm gonna tell you a story. This next song I'm gonna do is an old Muddy Waters song, but it's originally was written by Earl Hooker, and Earl Hooker, who obviously is a huge hero of mine. He originally did it as an instrumental because Earl didn't really sing, and he called it blue guitar, okay? And then I don't know who it was at Chess that went, man, that could be something for Muddy, but Willie Dixon ended up taking it and writing words to it, and they just overdubbed Muddy's vocal on Earl Hooker's track, okay? And then it became You Shook Me, which has been covered by everybody. I know Zeppelin and Jeff Beck Group, and I'm sure tons and tons of others. But in any rate, I love Earl Hooker a lot. So here's a little bit of that. So I got my old Silvertone. I got my Jack's 70s fuzz wah. I'm not going to use the fuzz, I don't think, but I'm going to use the wah wah, and I'm using the old Ampeg Gemini 1. You shook me, baby. You shook me all night long. You shook me, baby. You shook me all night long. You keep on shaking, darling. You messed up my happy home now. You know you move me, baby. Just like a hurricane. Baby, just like a hurricane. Well, you know you move me, darling, just like an earthquake moved the land. Shook me all night long. You shook me, baby. Shook me all night long, baby. You keep on shaking me, baby, and you messed up my happy home. All right, some Earl Hooker, Muddy Waters. I love that stuff. So, all right, so y'all ready for some story time? So, needless to say, not to get too personal on you, but, I've got lots of room for improvement in my life as a human being. And you know, this story I'm going to share with you is, like I said, I've never shared this story publicly. My closest friends know this story. Um, um, but I've always had a sense of embarrassment about it, to be honest. It's almost like I feel unworthy of the magnitude of how amazing it was. And, you know, at heart, when I'm thinking and acting healthy, um, and I'm connected to spirit, I'm not insecure, and um, I'm not the type of person that would kind of hold on to something so amazing and not let the light shine. Um, but you know, unfortunately, like many people out there, you know, I am. I'm insecure, and I you know, sometimes do stupid things as a result of it. And so, in the spirit of trying to write that in my own personality, and just and and also at the same time share an incredible thing, here it goes. So, the single greatest, you know, day experience of my life in the music business. So this is, I guess, about 3 years ago. Might have been four. It was in January. I remember that. And my dear friend, I've talked about on the show a couple of times. My dear friend David Kahn, who's an incredible producer, used to be the head of, I believe it was Warner Brothers Reprise in the '90s. Um, very funny, very intelligent, very talented man. Proud to know. I've worked on and off with him for many, many years now. And so I'll preface this with, you know, one of the many incredible people that David works with, is Paul McCartney. He produced two Paul records, Driving Rain and Memory Almost Full. And he's been involved in pretty much every live broadcast or recording that Paul has done in the last 20 years. Like whether it's like when he's doing SNL, or when he's done like the live DVDs. David is always like head of music supervision and mixing engineer and all of that. He's become an incredibly integral part of Paul's team. And so when I first got to know David, and was first started getting to know him and working with him a little bit, you know, it was always kind of in the back of my mind that the opportunity might come someday where I might meet Paul, you know. And it almost happened many times. There was a bunch of times, well, but at least a handful that I can remember, where like I was sitting working with him. David used to have a studio at Avatar in New York. Now he has a studio downtown. But for years, David had a studio suite upstairs at Avatar, and so I did a bunch of work for David at Avatar, and in Hell's Kitchen, Midtown Manhattan, and so there were many times where Paul was going to come by to approve something, or there were times where literally, like, you know, we're sitting there, you know, and I'm a few feet, you know, David and I are working on something, and, you know, his cell phone rings and it's Paul, and I like can hear Paul's voice, you know, like a few feet away from me, you know. And I'm like, oh, is today the day? So anyway, to make a long story longer, I had finally kind of given up, because there'd been so many near misses, that I kind of had, you know, kind of put it out of my mind, you know, of like, is it, you know, stop thinking the thought, is this the time, you know, which of course is when something is going to happen. when you're not expecting it. So a couple of years ago, like I said, I think it was 3 years ago, January, because I was touring heavily at the time, and there was a record that David wanted me to fly to New York and work on with him, and he flew me up and put me up in a nice hotel, and there we are working on a record, and it's always a blast, and it's always really, really, really awesome. I love New York, always will, and so we're there and we're working on this record, and I'm there for a few days, and the last day that I'm there, I'm coming in to work with David alone and just do overdubs. We were going to start around lunchtime that day, and then my flight was that evening out of LaGuardia at like 7 o'clock at night or something, or 8 o'clock. So like I was going to work the afternoon with David, and then a car was going to come get me and take me to the airport at like 4 or 5 or whatever. So I come in, and David and I are, talking about what we're going to do, and I'm drinking my coffee, and David nonchalantly says, "I think Paul's going to come by today." And I'm like, pardon my language, but I'm like, what the fuck? Are you serious? Like I'm astounded. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, he's going to come by, and he explained to me that Paul had just, gotten back from St. Bart's, where him and his family go for the holidays, or had gone for the holidays, I should say. And if memory serves me right, I think Paul was alone in New York City, and so he was just gonna hang out and go hang out with friends of his, And so, what's funny is I'm nervous telling this story. It's funny. Like I can remember how it made me feel, how just nervous I became. And so he says, yeah, he said, Paul's going to come in a few hours. And David, being a friend and being a bro, like set me up to win. He was like, well, let's get all of the stuff done, like that we need to get done. And he's like, there's this one track that I just want you to go crazy on. I want you to play slide, and I want you to, and he's like, we'll save that. And he's like, we'll do that when Paul's here. And I was like, talk about a buddy, like just setting you up for an amazing experience. And so needless to say, I mean, I'm not really that much of a nervous person. I mean, I'll get nervous about things like anybody, but when it comes to music in particular, I don't really get that nervous. And I'm not a person who really becomes that starstruck. I'll become starstruck in situations that people might like kind of laugh at. Like I'll meet like Michael Tolles or something like that, and I'm nervous because he's a big hero of mine, But obviously in this case, I mean, I just lost control, and did my best to hang on to control as best I could. And so we hurriedly got through all of the stuff and had this track, and sure enough, Paul calls, and I hear him like on the cell phone, go, hey David, where's the studio again? Yeah man, all right man, I'll call you. And David's like, and the studio that David has now is on like the 3rd floor of a building downtown. And he was like, yeah, he was like, call me when you're here, so I can come walk you in, and all that. So, then it's like my heart is just going crazy, and I'm trying so hard to keep it together, and doing a decent job, I think, but still, it's like, and so sure enough, Paul calls, and he's downstairs, and David's like, all right, I'm gonna go get him, and I'm like, okay, and I'm just sitting there alone in the control room, and I hear him come up the elevator. He comes off the elevator, and of course, a couple of interns all of a sudden are present, as I would completely be myself if I was in their situation. And Paul meets them and is very gracious. And Paul comes in, and I meet Paul, and you know, David introduces us, and you know, we exchange pleasantries, and we start kibitzing and all that. And David's like, yeah, we have this one track we have left, and we need JD needs to do some stuff. And Paul, I'll never forget, Paul goes, oh yeah, man, you know, just go ahead. He's like, I love watching sessions. And I'm like, Jesus, are you kidding me? And so Paul sits on the couch, and I play. And oddly enough, folks, I felt immediately more comfortable once I started playing music. Because again, like, music is like a comfortable place for me. Like, I was completely aware of what was going on, believe me. But it's going back to talking about like all that time with Don Kelly, and like learning how to control pressure, and like learning how to like kind of like sort of keep it in check where you don't get manic, you know. Thousands of hours of that certainly prepared me for this scenario. Because when I was playing music, I was I felt immediately comfortable. But then the track's over, and Paul McCartney's sitting there. And Paul, being Paul, got up, and he was like, yeah, it was great, man. It was great, man. It's really good, man. And he's like, to David, he was like, but you know, David, I hear some parts, you know. And he's like, do you mind? And you know, David's like, no, you're Paul McCartney. What do you hear? And so Paul turns to me and he hums, you know, he's like, JD, man, you know, like when it goes to, you know, and he hums me like a very, I don't remember what it was at the time, but it was something like, you know, it was something like a signature, very simple kind of a lick kind of thing. That was beautiful. That like was so simple, I would have never thought of it, okay? But he's Paul McCartney and I'm not. And, so I go through the track, and Paul's like, yeah, man. He's like, here, I'll show you. He's like, David, just play the whole track, and I'll show you, JD, where you should put them, you know. And so there's Paul McCartney directing me where to put these licks that he hummed to me. And so we do that, and we smiled and, you know, laughed, and it was really beautiful. And he pulled out, he had a little, and I've seen video of him with this, so I guess this is something that he's done, but he literally, after we got done, and he like knew, like that take was good and it sounded great, like he pulled out a little tiny harmonica that he like had in his pocket, and when I say tiny, it was like the size of my ring, okay, and started playing it, and of course, like, I remember it was in the key of C, and so I started playing along with him, and we like laughing and just, you know, like at that moment I'm like, oh my God, like I'm jamming with Paul McCartney on a tiny harmonica, like this is freaking crazy. And like me, like millions of other people out there, like, I mean, I used to get up when I was a little boy, 6, 7, 8 years old. I used to get up an hour and a half. I'll never forget this. I used to get up an hour and a half early before I had to get ready for school, because that's how long A Hard Day's Night and Help, the two Beatle movies, were. They were an hour and a half. And in particular, I watched A Hard Day's Night a million times. And gigantic, massive Beatles fan I was. And, you know, that childhood dream of not only getting to meet them, but to get to jam with them, to get to have private time. I mean, it's a dream. It's totally a dream come true. So we jam with him on the harmonica, and we laugh, and I had Red with me. Red was the guitar I was playing, and you know, like I put it down, and he goes, he's like, it sort of reminds me of the one John used to play. And I'm like, he's talking about John. And we talked. We just started talking. Him and David started talking. Like, you know, the three of us were just sitting in the control room. The work was done. And I had at least an hour or more before the car was going to come take me to the airport. So I, so we sat there and just shot the breeze for an hour or more. And he talked about his vacation with his family, and he talked about. I remember we talked about Lana Del Rey. We talked about some mutual friends of his and David that I also know, and eventually we ended up getting onto the subject of the sort of 10,000 hour thing, which is ironic given that the book was written about that. But it wasn't said like the 10,000 hour thing or whatever, but it was basically it ended up, the topic of conversation was talking about all the years of preparation before something happens. And David talked about all his years as a piano player in San Francisco, working as a lounge player and working as a sideman, and years and years and years of that, and how that really helped him. And David sort of parlayed that into me talking about or him mentioning about all my years playing with Don Kelly, and that I'd gone through that similar experience. And I'll always remember, because we were talking about my days. I'm talking to Paul. If I mentioned I'm freaking talking to Paul McCartney, and Paul, I remember telling him that it was one of the cool things was getting to meet all the great musicians that would come in and see the band play. And I said, one of the coolest things was getting to meet Reggie Young, a great session player from Memphis. And what's funny is, I was like, Reggie Young, the session player and all that. And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, I know Reggie. And I'm like, of course you know Reggie, because Reggie opened for the Beatles with the Bill Black combo, Elvis's bass player. It's like, yeah, of course he knows Reggie. So anyway, I always remember that. And then that went into Paul talking about the Hamburg days. And I had a interesting scenario where we'd been around each other for an hour and a half and all this, and I can't say that I felt comfortable, but I was able to ask him some questions about the Hamburg stuff in particular that I always wondered. And I was like, well, how long did you really play every night, And he was like, oh man, he's like, we would play, from 8, I think he said like 8 or 9 at night till 4 or 5 in the morning, And I was like, well, how would you play solid? Would you take breaks? And he was like, oh, we'd play 45 minutes on, 15 off. And then I was like, well, how many sets did you have? I was like, did you have enough material to fill the whole night? Or I was curious, because I've never heard anybody talk about that. And I remember David kind of shooting me a look like, stop asking so many questions, after, because it was the third question, you know what I mean? And kind of I'll never forget David's look of watch it. But Paul, he answered, and he was like, well, he's like, that's the thing. He's like, in the beginning we just repeated stuff. And he's like, but we worked really hard at collecting records and learning them so that we had, I think he said that, eventually they had 4, I don't think he said 5, but he said 4 really solid 45-minute sets. And he elaborated on that. And he said, and the thing that was cool about it was when we went back to England, he's like, we wouldn't play gigs that long. He's like, we would get up and play one 45-minute set. And he's like, so what we would do then is, he's like, we were in Hamburg where we had worked tirelessly to kind of perfect these 4 sets that were great. And he's like, and then we were able to sort of cherry pick the best numbers from those 4 sets to make one amazing set. And he's like, when we went back to Liverpool, the other bands didn't know what hit them because we were so, like, we had polished our act. It's so fascinating to me. And here I am getting it, right from his mouth, And so, so eventually, it became time where it was time for me to leave, And the car came and it was time for me to leave. And David and Paul were going to go on and have dinner together and hang out. And, we said our goodbyes. And he was like, man, JD, it was great hearing you play. It was great meeting you. And he gave me a big hug. And I left. And I remembered going to the airport. And obviously there's a huge rush of emotions going through my mind. And of course I called my wife and I called, some family members and, people that I just had to tell what the hell just happened to me. And, but I remember the feeling of when I got into the car to go to the airport and saying to myself, if I can make it through that without completely falling apart, I can make it through anything. It was like the hugest, biggest jolt of like confidence, like not as a musician, but also like as a dealing with stress, dealing with pressure, dealing with nerves. And the other notion was, I think that was about the perfect length of time. I don't think I could have withheld my attempt at trying to be normal any longer than the time I was around him. It was incredibly difficult to keep it together. And there's two interesting little observations that I'd like to share with you of my, of my afternoon with Paul McCartney. One is that Paul was, just his demeanor, okay, was, I mean, he was really warm. He was really warm and really sweet and very engaging and like, but there was this sort of aura, it's not, I don't know, aura, but that like there's a vibe that he kind of was putting out of like, I'm totally into this and I'm totally cool talking to you and hanging with you and being around you and everything's cool, but you're not getting in here, sort of a vibe, like a very kind of like, very open and warm, but also very firm and very like strong. And to elaborate on that, it's like he has a force field that he's created around himself. And it has nothing, I'm not talking about like charisma and all the other kind of stuff. I'm just saying like it was very interesting to kind of like feel this like I'm sure that a lifetime of being one of the most influential people on the planet has kind of, he's grown this energy over time. And obviously there's so few people in history that can even relate to something like the experience he's been through. The other side of that is every once in a while in the conversation, Paul would like put it this way, like times where I started to get a little comfortable or started to finally get comfortable. It's like, I don't think it may have been conscious, may not have been, but he just would do little things to be like, hey, just in case you forgot, I'm Paul McCartney, so don't get too comfortable. And that's probably more in my own head than that, but it was just funny, man, It was an absolutely surreal experience and something that I hold near and dear. David, on the way to the airport, he called me. Him and Paul had gone out for a drink, and I heard Paul in the background, and he said some funny things, and it's just amazing, And it's definitely something that I look forward to when my daughter's older, sharing that story with her. that Daddy got to do that one day. And yeah, that's the greatest story I have to share. And it was I've just really, I don't know, for whatever reason, I've just always kept it really private. I guess I never really wanted it to seem like I was bragging about something, you know, insecurity, whatever. But absolutely amazing, and something I'll certainly never forget. And David, if you're watching, I love you from the bottom of my heart. You've been an incredible friend to me. It's an honor to work with you. And you know, David certainly didn't need to do that. And you know, but I know after the fact that David, you know, he was like, I knew you weren't going to embarrass me. You know, he's like, you know, because obviously someone in David's position has to be very protective of that kind of relationship. And you know, I got the one look of, okay, man, chill. But he also told me after the fact, David told me after the fact that he was like, yeah, man, he's like, I got a little nervous there because you were asking him questions. And he's like, Paul, you know, he's like, you just never know how Paul's going to react. And he's like, you know, he's like, but, you know, he's like, he answered your questions. And so he's like, obviously he liked you and he was comfortable. He's like, because he told me this, he's like, I've seen Paul like completely shut down a conversation and just like, all right, we're done, and just, you know, move on. Obviously something he's learned over the years of being Paul McCartney. So yeah, so honored that I actually got to sit. And yeah, I mean, we were just spent the whole afternoon. It's pretty amazing. So there you go, folks. And had I not spent all those years in Robert's Western world with heroes of mine walking in to see us play, and other famous people I wanted to impress, and producers I wanted to impress, and all that, had I not, I know that I would have fallen to pieces in that scenario. There's no way it could have held it together. Because even with all of that, it was the hardest, like, keeping it together that I've ever had in my life. And, you know, looking back on it, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, obviously he would have cut the visit short had I been doing a terrible job. You know, the fact that it was a prolonged private visit like that only speaks that I probably was doing a decent job. So, so there you go. So, moving into the end of the show here, I have a new bit of music that myself and Adam Abershoff and Michael Zimmerman put together this week. And, you know, needless to say, it's I've felt incredibly tender as a result of these last couple of weeks. And so I've chosen to sort of channel it into a little piece of music with some very dear friends of mine, and edit together a little video for you guys. And I'm going to play it right now. So without further ado, this is a little thing called When Will Then Be Now. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody. So I have a lot of things in me, but I've got a lot of love. Got a lot of love. And hopefully we can, through love, heal our planet. Because it's all we got. Love. Love. So this is JD Simo signing off. Thank you. Bless you. And I hope you have a great weekend. And thank you for taking the time to be with me once again. And my love and my blessings. And always remember to keep it greasy. Okay? Would you do that for me? I'll see you next time.